What it do? This is 3 Count Commentary. So this is your host, Mongo Slade. So I'm going to do something today that's going to be a little controversial. But first, I want to set some ground rules. For starters, how the nWo helped kill WCW. Now, what I want to do is before we even get into this video, I want people to know what killed WCW 100% was the Time Warner merger. Was Turner, Time Warner merged. These guys did not want WCW on the platform. They got rid of it. That was the death knell of WCW. And you have shit to do with creative. Okay? But I will say this. WCW, what really hurt them creatively was the nWo. And I'm going to talk about that today. We'll talk about how the nWo basically creatively bankrupted WCW to the point where it essentially aided in WCW's death. So, to go into it, there's like 4 major points. There is the subversion of tradition. There is the lack of planning. There is the fad aspects to it. And then there is which actually goes into the subverting of tradition, but is, basic stories will fall apart. You just couldn't have a story form with the nWo. So what do I mean by they subverted traditions? Now, what I mean is they took something that was a great idea. He turned the aspirational babyface Hulk Hogan into a heel. They blew him up, said that he was the greatest guy ever. And then he started to take credit for everything, the success of the wrestling business and everything else. And that was all fine. But the fatal mistake, the poison pill that really kind of ruined this stuff completely, was that the nWo wanted to be cool heels. And because they wanted to be cool heels, there really was no... It's hard to... You cannot be a heel and people actually like you, right? That makes things very, very difficult. It makes it especially difficult on the baby faces, because getting people to like you is already hard enough, right? It's easier to get people to not like you. That's why everybody likes working heel. You talk to people like, who would you rather like working babyface or heel? Almost everybody says, I like working heel. I love working heel because it's easy. You're calling the match most of the time, and it's easy to get people to not like you. It is hard to get people to like you. Now, if you have heels on the other side, that is making it even more difficult for you to get over as a babyface, then that makes it, pretty much impossible. And it's not just, well, they constantly want to go over. They always want to win. That's not even the issue, because you could build sympathy through multiple losses and through embarrassments and stuff like that. But the problem with the cool heel is that they would not allow people to get over on them, right? So it would be, for a long time, nobody really dropped members of the nWo, except for unless you were at the top. Like Roddy Piper was able to get over on them, because Piper beat Hogan a bunch of times, but he was like the only one, right? Like he was the only one that was really allowed to get over during the early days of the nWo. Of course, Luger and Sting and, Goldberg, but that was later. That was like 98, 99, those eras. nWo really should have been over by 99 anyway, but I'll get to that in a moment. When you have cool heels and you're trying to be threatening towards them, you're trying to take a stand towards them, and they don't really sell, intimidation. They don't really sell your intensity. Instead, they're mocking you. I forget who said this. I forget who was talking about this, but there was somebody on a documentary that talked a lot about, the mockery that especially Scott Hall would do, is when he would do the ooh, and that would make people not take the babyface seriously. So the babyface would cut a serious promo, and Scott Hall would go ooh with his fingers and everything, and it kind of blow it all off, make it turn it into a joke. You can't build heat that way. It's the heel is getting too cute. And because of this, basic story structure begins to fall apart. This is, of course, makes it very difficult to tell stories, because people are mixing up who's the baby faces and who's the heels. They just want the heels to win, which is not what you want. But that's near the end. The second thing that they did wrong is that they had no real plan. Outside of, this is why I say WCW made the mistake of going to the nWo past 1998. When you had, there seemed to be a plan, right? That you were going to build up Hogan and Sting. That was the ultimate goal, Hogan and Sting. Well, you had to tell the story to get there, right? And that part was fine. But then you had the lack of planning and other pieces where you had the ballooning of the nWo. How the nWo went from 3 guys to 5 to 7 to 15 to 20 to 2 separate groups. And it was like, it was just, that could not have been planned. Now, I know that there was other pieces to it, and you know, there's these issues that they may have had later on during the creation of the Wolfpack, which I believe it was in '98 when they created the Wolfpack. Hall and Nash has talked about this, about, you know, they wanted more royalties, so they created the Wolfpack so that they wouldn't have to deal with Hogan and Hogan's ego and all that type of stuff. See, the thing is, that's what I mean by the nWo killed WCW. It just kept meant like we just going to keep creating nWo, right? Like it just kept replicating. It just kept being more and more nWo instead of keeping it strictly to the, you know, these guys and maybe a couple of other people that might have been important for stories. They just kept multiplying. They kept bringing in guys. And then you went from nWo being the main event to nWo from the first match to the middle match to the main event. They're all over the card, right? So now these guys are no longer special and they're no longer exclusive. And the crazy thing about this is, and this is a bit of a box brain argument, is things become less cool the more inclusive they become. So the nWo they were cool heels for sure, but they got substantially less cool the more people that came into the group. You understand what I'm saying? The more people that came in the group, the bigger the group got, the less inclusive and less exclusive, I mean, that it looked. It used to be, hey, you could take these guys seriously. Hall is a serious guy. Nash is a serious guy. Hogan, you have to take him serious. Savage is another one. You know, he fits into that mold. Former WWF guy. He's a main event guy. Fits, right? You know, Ted DiBiase, a good addition to this group. Main event guy, former WWF guy, makes sense to be in that group. Even Rick Rude, you know, another one, fits. Kurt Hennig, another one, fits. Disco Inferno, what the fuck? Scott Norton, why? You know, the Giant, why? You know, there's numerous guys like Buff Bagwell, why? You know, like even the Steiner brothers, like why? You know, like when you say you have to justify why each member, like if you just set a specific way for you to become a member of the nWo, you have to be a former main event top level guy in the WWF, because this is the storyline that we're telling. Then it would have made sense for certain people to be in the group. Now, you may say it wouldn't make any sense for Waltman to be in the group then because he wasn't top level. But you can grandfather Waltman as a clique guy, you know, as being friends of Hall and Nash, you know, because he was sort of propped up by Hall and WWF anyway. There's a relationship between the two of them that reaches back to the WWF. So you can grandfather him in. The Steiner brothers, that's a bit of a stretch. You know, that's a bit of a stretch. Luger, also a bit of a stretch. You know, but Sting, absolutely not. Why was Sting ever a member of the nWo? Why was Disco Inferno ever a member of the nWo? Why was Conan ever a member of the nWo? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, they just kept ballooning it because there was no plan. You know, it was guys doing whatever they want. You know, so because of that creative control. Hogan had creative control. He was only losing to people he wanted to lose to. He was only working with people he wanted to work with. You know, so, and then, of course, he ended up fucking Sting in the end and all that type of stuff with the whole fake fast count and all that bullshit. That should have been the end of the nWo. That should have been it. Once Sting, you know, came in, tanned or not, and I tend to believe that a lot of people that Bischoff, and if you listen to Bischoff talk about the whole Sting wasn't tanned, he basically said that Sting not being tanned meant that he wasn't, you know, in good shape, which meant that he could possibly have been, you know, out of whack. Let's just put it like that. I also know Sting had some problem with drugs, and he also had some other issues at the time, you know, around that time. I don't know if he was on drugs at the time. I think it might have been in like 98 when he finally started, you know, visibly having problems. But Sting was he was kind of out of whack in 97, I guess. I couldn't tell you for sure because he only wrestled one match the whole year. So it wasn't like you know, he wrestled a bunch of matches and then this particular match he was off. But because there was no plan beyond Sting, there really shouldn't have been an NWO beyond Sting. You should have started having the NWO fall apart. You could have spent a year telling them how the NWOs were falling apart. Instead, what they did was they went back to Hogan, and then the shit started all over again because you're creatively bankrupt. And then we just had to go through it all over again. And then Goldberg, right? And then it didn't end. You know, because once Hogan and all those guys began to leave, then you just had Jarrett and Bret Hart, and it just started all over again. There was a new NWO every year until WCW closed. And then there was still NWO afterwards in WWF. It goes to show that people were not thinking. They was like, this cash cow, we're just going to milk the shit out of it. And that goes to number 3. They created a fad, right? You create something that, when you create a fad, like Tickle Me Elmo, or you create something that is popular for a short amount of time, it has a very short shelf life. All fads do. Eventually, your fad stops being cool. And it's usually due to something brand mismanagement. You know, you start adding members to it, like I've already talked about. You start making it more inclusive and less exclusive. You start spreading it around too much. You know, they had NWO pay-per-views. There was WCW, NWO everything. They were co-branding. I don't understand how you co-brand with an invading force. You know, it was this kind of stuff just made it, sure, it was cool. But what do you do when the cool factor goes away? You don't have basic story structure, and that's part 4. Basic story structure is you need heels that people hate, baby faces that people love. They had a very, very difficult time maintaining baby faces that people loved. Sure, they got Sting, and around the same time you got Goldberg. And I think you might have got DDP out of that because DDP was wrestling with Savage. But for most of the other people, there was no benefit to fighting the NWO because you just got beaten up every week. So when you had that when you were in that sort of situation, how are people supposed to get over? You know, I said something similar about ECW, right? When ECW, basic story structure was thrown out of the window because there's no countouts, there's no disqualifications. Therefore, nothing the bad guys do is really cheating. You know, technically it's not cheating. If you don't like it, fine. But technically it's not cheating, you know? Even though they would still do slick shit like low blows behind the ref's back. I'm like, well, why would you do that in every match with no disqualification? You know, so, but you have basic story structure falling apart. You got cool heels who won't allow the baby faces to really get over on them. For a long time, you really didn't beat the NWO, any member of them, for a little bit, unless you were lower card guys. That's why they brought in the lower card guys so they can do jobs, right? Instead of just saying, well, you know, we're going to bring in Virgil, quote unquote Vincent, so he can do jobs. We're going to bring in Scott Norton so he can do jobs. We're going to bring in all of these guys for which there is no plan and no reason for them to be in the group. There is no end game for them. Well, because we need guys to do jobs in tag matches, and we need Stevie Ray to do jobs in the TV tournament or the TV division or whatever. It's like, how about not having guys in that division? How about maybe having your NWO Cruiserweight, which is Waltman, and then you have your NWO Tag Team, which is Hall and Nash, and you have your NWO World Champion, which is Hogan, and then maybe you have another main event NWO guy, which would be Savage, where you could have non-title feuds, and then you have 3-4 matches with the NWO on a potentially 8-match card, and they all can be individually important, instead of, well, every match has to have an NWO member because every match has to have 100 run-ins, and then nobody can get the fuck over. You know, and The people who got over, DDP, Goldberg, Lex, Piper, a lot of them didn't really need it. You know, like, listen to the names I said. Sting was already a world champion. He didn't really need to get put over by the NWO. Same thing with Luger. You know, DDP was completely different. Goldberg, completely different. They were, you know, mostly new. Piper, again, you know, he was, you know, already a main event guy. You know, they really should have, and this was the big drop ball right here, is that they had an opportunity to build a squad, a homegrown WCW squad to confront the NWO. And you already know what it's called, the Four Horsemen. Just imagine that. If you would have had the NWO as this invading force, this counterculture, they're thumbing their nose at tradition, and it's headed by Hulk Hogan. And then you have tradition itself, the actual establishment of WCW. The Four Horsemen, Arn Anderson, Ric Flair, and two other guys. And then you could have built off of that, you know. And even if you didn't want to count Flair, you could have, for starters, you had Flair at the top. So you had Flair to fight Hogan. And I'm not saying Flair should have beat Hogan or anything like that, but Flair was a good gatekeeper for that position, right? And it would, if you were sitting down, booking a card, looking at your cards, and you're saying to yourself, what would be a great counter to the NWO as an invading force? You would look at the establishment. And then you say, who is the most establishment guys that we have? Sting is one of them. And number 2 has to be fucking Ric Flair. Hell, Ric Flair has to be number 1. So why wasn't Ric Flair integral in this NWO story? Makes no sense to me. Because they're dealing with cool heels. You know, Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen as the people who are trying to protect WCW. And maybe you even did something slick like brought Lex back into the Horsemen. Because Lex is a former Horseman. So now he's going to rejoin the Horsemen to fight the NWO. You know? And then Sting is also a former Horseman. But Sting has been fucked over by the Four Horsemen before. So he doesn't really want to be bothered with them. And, you know, and you do that sort of thing. That story still exists. But instead of Hall and Nash just running over the tag team division, you would have had some guys, as far as the Four Horsemen is concerned, that, you know, had a legacy, had a pedigree for them to stand up to. Imagine how Starrcade 97 would have been so much better if it had been the official kill of the NWO, where you would have had, I don't think Waltman would have lasted. I think he had problems. So Waltman probably wouldn't have made it. But if you would have had somebody, maybe the Steiner brothers or something, that were the stalwart establishment WCW guys who beat Hall and Nash for good, period. That's the end of them. And then Hogan goes against Sting. He loses. That's the end of him. And now we have to rethink, you know, Hogan, Hall, Nash. They have to rethink what they're doing. You know, they have to reboot. They have to do something else. The NWO didn't work. It failed. The plan failed. So maybe they start bickering amongst themselves or something. But when you didn't have anybody to get over, you didn't build up, you only built up one person. And then once they got past that one person through a bunch of chicanery and smoke and mirrors and everything, what was left? You know, what was left? And that's how it ended up killing WCW, because they couldn't get away from it. They had a couple of natural ends to the NWO. You still would have pushed it too far by going into 98, right? But let's say, okay, we got to do something because we got this Bill Goldberg guy. I really want to get him over. So we're gonna limp the NWO along for a little bit longer just so he can put him over. So they can put him over. Okay, so then that should have been the end of it. And I've always said, just imagine how much money WCW could have made if Hogan versus Goldberg 2 had took place at Starrcade, and it was Bill Goldberg, undefeated world champion, versus Hulk Hogan, yellow and red, the immortal Hulk Hogan, a redeemed Hulk Hogan. He had months to do it, right? Bischoff started talking. What did he say? That they started talking about taking the title off of Goldberg in August, right? That was right after Goldberg fucking won the belt. If you want to, I think he won the belt in July. So you're talking about that big show right there. There couldn't have been a bigger match if you would have killed Hulk Hogan, and that was it. No more NWO Hulk Hogan. No more. He had to go and self-reflect and say, I got a rematch clause, but you're not fighting Hollywood Hulk Hogan. You know, and then he goes on a redemption tour. And then he shows up at Starrcade as the yellow and red Hulk Hogan. The immortal Hulkster. That could have been fucking phenomenal. But they didn't do that. They probably didn't even think of it. Probably because they would have been like, well, you can't beat Bill Goldberg clean. You don't want Bill Goldberg to beat the Hulkster. That's egos, man. That's a big money situation they had right there. That was big money they threw away. Instead, they put the belt on fucking Nash. NWO continues because you still got Hall involved. So the NWO fucks over Goldberg, and the NWO just like they fucked over Sting the year before, right? So you did it twice. They fucked over Luger too. So this is really the third strike. You know, they lost to, you know, Hogan lost to Luger on Nitro. They fucked him over. That was strike one. Strike two, they fucked over Sting. That was a very natural end to the story. And then they fucked over Goldberg. So it was like, this shit's never going to end. It's never going to be over. No, baby faces will never actually get over. You know? And since the baby faces will never get over, and the heels are being cool, and people are confused by who they like, the baby faces or the heels, people just walked away. And look at the opposition. In the WWF, Vince McMahon was not trying to be cool. Now, The Rock was trying to be cool, you know. But, you know, The Rock was counter to Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was also cool. And then The Rock knew to play the fucking heel when he's wrestling Steve Austin. Now, the same thing that I've said about the NWO, I can say about The Rock. You know, The Rock did a lot of the same shit as far as belittling his opponents, not taking them seriously. Like I always hate that promo that he did before the Armageddon pay-per-view, where he made fun of Kane, voice box, and he made fun of Undertaker. And it was like, he just turned his opponents into a fucking joke. If you don't take the people seriously, how can the fans take them seriously? If you don't take your opponent seriously, how can the fans take them seriously? That's one of the reasons why I don't really fuck with The Rock. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, I love The Rock. I'm like, kind of like, eh. His shtick was basically to belittle his opponents, make himself look really cool. And then it was like, all right, that works. But then when The Rock left, it was, oh, this guy was one of the guys The Rock ridiculed for months and months and months. And then maybe The Rock did the job to the guy once or twice, but that was about it. He blew that off too, because losing didn't mean anything. The only time The Rock actually made losing look like it mattered is when he lost against Austin. You know? And Hogan was doing the same thing. Hogan would come back out playing air guitar, you know, no big deal, nothing matters. Hall and Nash, ooh, nothing matters. When nothing matters, people began to peel out. You know, thank WWF was lucky that they had other storylines and other things going on that was able to keep people's attention. WCW didn't have that. You know, they had so much focus on Hogan and what he was doing. And then they had the occasional thing with Savage and what he was doing. Then they started having the Savage fight Hogan, and Hogan is fighting all these other guys. And then there's a bunch of disqualifications and, you know, all type of shit going on. It became too much. Your basic story structure began to fall apart. Basic story structure couldn't stay still. And this is how WCW ended up dying creatively. It just became, we got to find a new way to get back to the NWO. We got to keep milking that cow, even if nothing is coming out of it. Even a fucking steer at this point. We got to keep trying to milk it. Because they had become so creatively bankrupt and so reliant on the same concepts over and over again. And the same concepts were barely working as it was. You know, it was fresh for a while. It was new for a while. But over time, it just, especially since, I know I'm looking at 21 years into the future. You know, I'm 2021, looking back at something that took place in 97, 98, 99, and saying, oh, this is dumb, this is dumb. But there were, and to be quite honest, WWE did a similar thing with Mr. McMahon. They had him go on way too long. But they found new ways to freshen it up, and they always, you know, basically they went too long with that shit too. But WCW ended up going out of business, you know, because they didn't have another good idea. Outside of the nWo and Goldberg, they didn't have another good idea. So, but let me know what you guys think of this theory in the comment section below. Use the hashtag 3Count Commentaries to spread the word of 3Count Commentaries. And I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.
Yeah. Yeah.